Chapter 3 Sacrifices. Lamare Amark. As the carriage lurched forward and slowly began the long journey to the Kino Palace, I watched my son's figure standing by our doorway become smaller with each turning of the wheels. Each grating was like a thud in my chest that made me queasy. I had no intentions to meet with Wind. Not ever again, I told myself. But whether I liked it or not, it was something I would have to endure for as long as I lived. As long as he is emperor. I yawned, covering my mouth although I was alone in the carriage. I had only slept for a few hours, as I needed to wake up early to finish the scrolls. I tried to control myself from falling asleep. Lately, nightmares have come to me relentlessly. I shunned memories, but they always came back, and when they did, I crumbled, even though I had been trained to become a strong ruler. My vision blurred with unshed tears as I remembered bearing my power to wind. If only I could turn back time, I would have been more careful about revealing it. The betrothal was announced throughout the land, and for several months, orange and blue ribbons were tied to the trees that lined the Kino Palace's sidewalks. Each day, a ribbon would be removed from a tree, a sign that the wedding day grew closer. And when the last ribbons were removed, I wore my best gown and rode a high chair carried by a dozen naked men to the main ballroom of the palace. Curtains were draped over the sedan chair's posts to cover me, but I could see everyone's faces as my carriage edged towards the altar. Once I was in front of Wind, he stood up, knelt in front of me, and kissed my hands. I pledged myself to the highest princess of Akea, to be her consort. That I would protect thee. That her life would come before mine. Trumpets blared, and we were wed. As simple as that. For Wind, though, it did not stop there. He had to prove himself worthier than ever. As the future empress's consort, Wind was expected to travel all over Akea, to all the 14 provinces of the land, and earn the Lord's approval with only a limited time. All these he had to do in a fortnight, one province for each day. If he could return in this short time, showing the proof of his travels by revealing distinctive emblems tattooed onto him by each lord, not even the emperor himself could question Wind's place as my consort. The citizens gathered inside the royal hall and awaited Wind's return after 14 days. As the golden bell beside our land's flag tolled, we saw Wind riding a sea of clouds, like a god with his ashen hair and his lean, bronze body naked, covered only by dark tattoos of the 14 provinces' emblems that made up Akea. On his right shoulder were the rising stars of Akea Islands, and on the left were the horsemen in flight of a mare. Trailing down his right arm was the double-edged sword of Bulaknan. His body was a map of all the insignias in our land, the tattoos were the seals that bound the provinces to the empress's consort. Wind stepped down from the clouds, and the citizens who witnessed the event pulled their shawls tighter as the royal hall unmistakably became misty and cold. The court servant approached, bowed down before him, and dressed him in red robes. My father stood proudly in front of the assembly, his face beaming. I could tell what he was thinking, that Wind would make the people bow to him, and there would be an assurance that the Amark bloodline would never perish. Wind never even looked at me. He went straight to my father, knelt in front of him, and kissed his hands. In return, my father took the jar of grapeseed oil beside him and poured some over Wind's head. By this, you are family, you are who you will become, you are Akea, he said as he anointed him. Wind stood, and Nortsum embraced him. Even with the welcoming gesture, Wind's arms remained hanging limply to his sides, not returning the embrace. My gut tightened, the old fear strengthened, and I almost summoned the gods to make me disappear. At that moment of confusion and fear, Wind looked at me and smiled. And just like that, my worries vanished. I was completely taken by him. Until that point, I had forgotten that taking Wind as my consort would bestow upon him a gift from the emperor. This became a tradition so that the rest of the citizens were assured that Wind or whoever was elected consort received the emperor's favor. That moment that Wind's smile instantly drew me to him proved that he had gained part of the emperor's power. I was charmed. Wind fixed his gaze on me as he moved to where I was standing. Right in front of me, I looked up at the man I would only call my husband starting that day. My lips parted as I waited for him to claim me. He swooped me off my feet and kissed me, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Akea celebrated for a month, a period which everybody knew would be dedicated to conceiving. My father expected an heir. Wind and I spent our first days traveling across the land. Instead of staying in one of the empire's estates, We settled in standard rooms because Wind wanted me to experience the life that he lived before we came to be. He took me riding clouds and showed me how to make water out of them. Of course, I could only try because my power was not like his. With each new trick that he showed me, I giggled like a schoolgirl, amused by the man who would soon hold Akea in his hands. I knew that all the women in our land envied me. Sometimes, when women approached him and knelt before him or called him my lord, a burning sensation would start inside my heart. I would lock myself inside a room and cry, jealous of the attention the women were giving him. He was mine and no others, I would tell myself. He knew the world from beyond the outskirts of the palace, and he made me appreciate the beauty of living even more. Our month together was about to end. The Empire expected us to be back in the Kino Palace in a few days, but I was unsure whether I had fallen pregnant and if I would soon present an heir all over the land. I had not been nauseated, nor did I have mood swings, which I heard were common symptoms among pregnant women. I was nervous, but Wind told me that there was no reason to feel that way because I was still young and had all the time in the world to bear an heir. The day before we were due to head back to the palace in Kino, Akea's capital, Wind and I spent some time in the middle of a brook, hidden by mountains. We had been kissing when suddenly, he broke off. He looked at me intently and asked, "What's your power?" "It's something strange. I don't like to talk about it," I said. My father forbade me from sharing my power with anyone because it was unusual in a good and yet scary manner. Anything I wrote down could happen should I so desire it. I could easily make Akea mine by writing it down and meaning it, but where was the sense in that when I was the princess of an empire, the second to the throne? "I'm sure I won't find it so appalling," he said, his lips curving into a smile. I should have sensed that his being charming was his way to draw my secret out of me. Everyone in Akea had powers, but before anyone could fully harness their gift, a presentation to the emperor had to be made. With his acceptance consummated, their names would then be listed in the official Akene records as citizens. These acts were the very essence of gaining citizenship in the land. Otherwise, an Akene would be an unborn, a lost one, or a free-farer as some rebels preferred to brand themselves. For royalty like myself, the declaration and presentation of power were not mandatory. Being royalty meant service to the people, and in exchange for this lifetime commitment, the non-declaration of one's ability was among our privileges. Regardless, it was still a choice to share or not to share what our power was with anyone. I shook my head, smiling. I was giddy over my husband's charms yet unsure if I could trust him with my power. "It wouldn't interest you, dear husband. Try me." His silver eyes were piercing and eager. I was unaware of how to resist him. When I still did not respond, he turned his back to me and walked away, the water rippling as he glided across the surface. I was an idiot to act out on impulse. I could not have my husband leave me like that. I would do anything to keep him beside me. By then, he had taken me captive with his strength, power, and charisma. "Writing," I shouted. He stopped and looked at me. "Whatever I write could happen should I so desire it," I said. His eyebrows shot up. I thrust a finger up in the air and wrote, "Come back to me." As I did, the words glowed like wildfires against the air. For a few seconds, they remained, and then the words faded, leaving wisps of smoke and ash as they vanished. Even I get amazed at how spectacular my power was when on display. I could write on anything: paper, rock, metal, even on water. I did not have to look his way to know he was striding towards me because the water's soft ripples told me that he was. When he was right in front of me, he touched my chin, and I looked up at his face. He was smiling, but somewhat disconcertingly, the smile did not quite reach his eyes. He kissed me as though it was to seal his success in drawing from me a secret, but my body did not respond to his touch in the way a wife should have to her husband. I shivered and felt scared but kept my emotions from him. My father had been right when he told me to keep my unique ability to myself. But it was too late. It has been almost 14 moon turns ago, but I still look back at that moment and consider myself accountable for what has happened to Akea. Guilt is all that envelops me now. My life as a royal scribe now is starkly different from my life as a princess a long time ago. The carriage will take me to the Kino Palace, which used to be my home, but now it felt like a forsaken dungeon, one so vast that it holds Kino, all Akenes, and me, under the rule of an illegitimate emperor. With my father gone, I had no ally to bring Akea back to its former glory, back to when everyone enjoyed absolute freedom. I looked down and found the scroll lying on my lap. I held it tightly because it was the only thing that kept Kino and me alive.